Yes, I know. Another off day edition of Locked On Capitals. Well, we have a few of those this week, but today we're going to do something a little bit different. No Caps news. I know there is some. We'll get to that on Thursday. But today it is for the gentleman that has been kind enough to grace us with his presence for now, 5 or 6 times now? It's been a few times. Today's episode is for John Walton.
You're Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another and special episode of Locked On Capitals. I am your host, as always, the insider of the insiders, Tyler Kuehl, for today's program where we will talk about the Washington Capitals, but just not the current rendition of them. We're going to talk to the gentleman who has been calling games now for over a decade for the Washington Capitals, the man who has called the teams so far only and first Stanley Cup championship. He has called Calder Cup championships. He has been a public address announcer in Major League Baseball, hung out of a helicopter doing traffic reports. He has done just about everything there is in this business. John Walton. We will talk to him here in just a moment. Yes, it is pre-recorded. As you can tell, I'm not wearing the same shirt. You'll notice that. If you're watching on Locked On Capitals, of course, if you're listening, you're like, we wouldn't have known that, Tyler. I'm like, I just had to let you know. I had to keep you informed. So you didn't think that we were doing this on the fly. However, though, before we get to that, guys, don't you know that it's the new year? So that means New Year's resolutions. It is your time to get fit or eat healthier. Well, make sure you make Built Bar a part of your plans. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar and maybe even better than a candy bar. It makes it easier to stick to your resolutions as well because Built Bar tastes so good, you'll want to eat it, unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky, waxy, or taste like a chemical spill. The ones that are covered in chocolate also are 100% real chocolate, those Built Bars. So go to Built.com right now to use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your first order. Once again, use LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. And we're back again with John Walton. John, thank you very much for coming back to the Locked On Capitals. The fans have loved listening to you. I've seen the metrics, the stats, of course, and the likes and all the retweets and all the good stuff. And people like when you're on the show because people, when they see me all the time by myself, everyone gets a little annoyed and me yelling and screaming. But with that, John, I want to get to your story because every broadcaster has a different path to where they get to the NHL or whatever the highest level they make it as. And I want to know, first off, the big question I always ask people, because it's easy to say, oh, how did you become, what made you want to be an accountant? Why did you want to become a doctor? My wife is a nurse because her sister and her mother all were nurses, went through nursing. How did John Walton get interested into broadcasting?
Well, I suppose that probably starts really early on. I was always fascinated by television, radio, mass media from a young age. I was a Cub Scout in the Minneapolis suburbs, and my den mother, her husband was actually the weatherman on our CBS affiliate in Minneapolis. So I was, I think, attracted to that. I remember, being over at their house and he was off between 6 and 11, like he'd be home for dinner. And then he's like, well, got to go back to work. 10 o'clock comes early. And, I'd see him on the news. And I was always fascinated by that. It probably started with that. Mike Fairborn, a WCCO in Minneapolis. And I think as I started to get older and my family moved from Minnesota to Ohio, and I was without serious hockey, I'd gone from a hockey hotbed in the Twin Cities to being in Southwest Ohio, which charitably in the 1980s had nothing in the way of hockey. And it's a lot better now in the state of Ohio than it used to be with the Blue Jackets and, the teams in Cleveland and Cincinnati and the like. But at the time, there was nothing. So I was drawn to the radio and listening to Dan Kelly and Ken Wilson on KMOX and listening to WBZ in Boston and, listening to WCBS in New York and a lot of different stations that you could hear in Southwest Ohio at night. And, I think it was by the time that I was in high school and my love for the game of hockey, which I was fortunate because even though I'd left Minnesota, I got to spend my high school years around college hockey at Miami University, where I ended up going to college. And being around and watching that team in high school, I think kind of solidified my love of the game. And I really wanted to try and do something within it to, do hockey, do communications. And thankfully for me, it ended up working out pretty well in the end.
Oh, just a little bit. I mean, you only made it to the NHL, but we'll get to how you got there in just a moment. Because you mentioned Miami of Ohio and the Red Hawks. This was back in the CCHA days, right? Like the old CCHA days.
Oh,
correct? Yeah.
Those
were.
It was a great league, and I still miss the bus trips to Bowling Green and Western Michigan and Ferris State, and when you had Michigan and Michigan State and Ohio State and Notre Dame, and it was just everything was by bus, and it was a relatively inexpensive league to run because the schools were all within busing distance. Charitably, like Superior might not qualify for bus distance, but we still drove there. And it was such a wonderful time for me, getting to know the ins and outs of working for a hockey team, and it was an experience that I'll never forget.
Because that was around the time when, like, I think I almost said Dan Kelly again. No, but Dan Boyle was there and Adam Copeland.
Oh, yeah.
Not Adam Copeland, the wrestler Adam Copeland. I should probably clarify that for some people. The Red Hawks. I always remember Miami back in the day in the late '90s and early 2000s. They were never good enough to seem like they got over the cliff, but they were always good enough to be pesky like Michigan and Michigan State or whatever. And you mentioned Western. I've been fortunate enough this season to call a few games with Western. Robin Hook, I'm sure as you probably remember him, he's been fortunate enough to give me some opportunities there. And I remember those days as a kid, and obviously I wasn't involved as much as I am now. I was 7, 8 years old, but it was always fun to watch. And just because it just seemed like, everyone always talked about WCHA and Hockey East, but the CCHA was it for me. Like, I don't know about you there.
It was a great league. And, I loved, whether it was going to Lawson and Kalamazoo or whether it was, I always loved going to Munn in East Lansing because, and I had this conversation years later with Anson Carter. Anson was a player from Michigan State at the time that I was calling games, and Miami had gotten their doors blown off by the Spartans for pretty much 20 straight years. And they had gone in the last year that I was there. They hardly had ever won in East Lansing, let alone swept the Spartans. And they went in and won both on a Friday and Saturday night. And this was before the name change. They were still the Redskins then. And they did this thing, yeah, which quite frankly was kind of silly, but they would call it scalping the ice, where they would all get together and scrape together some ice shavings. They put it in kind of like you do in football, like grab a piece of turf or something like that. And the Spartans did not like that even a little bit. And so Saturday, Miami's got a lead in the third period. And as it was told to me, funny enough, one of the guys, there were 6 players suspended, 3 for each, Miami and Michigan State. Kevin Adams was one of the guys who's now the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres. He was a mass comm major at Miami. I had classes with him there. And Anson Carter was suspended on the other side. And it was told to me by both gentlemen involved and others that, as the time ran down and it looked like Miami was going to win, the guys on the Michigan State guys were saying, if you guys do that thing to our ice, there's going to be problems. So everyone knew that it was about to go down, at least the people on the bench. So they came over. They usually did it at center ice, like this big, like WWE type show, like at the end of a road
Everyone
game.
just comes in the middle and just surrounds each other like it's the Royal Rumble.
You can imagine how well the visiting team were doing that. This was not the most sportsmanlike thing in the world, but it was what started this whole thing. They knew it was going to be trouble. So they had decided, hey, let's just go over by the door. Let's act like we're going to leave. We're going to get just a little bit of dust over there out by our bench, and then let's leave. Well, the Spartans just waited there. They knew what was going to happen. So they, as a team, 20 guys come rushing across the ice, everybody grabbing a dance partner. It was crazy. And I'd never, before or since, I've never seen anything quite like it. And it was one of the most penalized games, I think, in CCHA history. And it was a great weekend for Miami. It didn't have the greatest ending, of course, but it's funny, all these years later, when I was able to climb the ladder and I was able to have that conversation with Anson Carter when I was at NBC with him, and I'd known from Kevin and others. You mentioned Dan Boyle. His parents were among the first listeners I ever had. So
that's cool.
First, I think that we'd actually figured out by that point we had an internet stream, but it wasn't at all. I mean, it was probably sounded like something from the moon, but that you could listen out of market.
Takes a shot.
Exactly. So, but that's kind of neat, to see some of the guys, especially Danny, who ended up winning the Cup with Tampa. And there are a lot of guys now from Miami that have, and all of them, anybody who's ever played in the NHL has got their jersey hanging in the building. So it's really neat to be a part of all that and be able to see it from an NHL perspective now.
Yeah, and I've been to Munn, and you mentioned Munn, and Munn, for those that don't know, is how the old Boston Garden used to be. Benches on opposite sides, but it was the home bench, and there was only one tunnel. So if you wanted to get off the ice, if Michigan State waited there, you had to either wait for them or go through them, and that's why Michigan and Michigan State used to have some classic little brouhahas. But no, so you go to Miami, you get through there, and you also, I remember when I did an interview with Todd Crocker from the Toronto Marlies. Love Todd.
One of my favorite people, by the way.
Oh, a great filmmaker. He's a filmmaker, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
He does so much stuff. The first question I asked him when I interviewed him, it was when he came into Grand Rapids a few years ago, back when you could, meet people in person, John. It's something that happened before the pandemic, apparently. The first question I asked him was his time with the Hamilton Tiger Cats at the CFL, because looking up his stories, man, that's kind of just, you're this hockey guy. You've been doing great stuff. Worked with the Bulldogs back in the day, the Tiger Cats. Well, and that was kind of interesting. You, John, you happened to, fortunate enough to be a public address announcer for the Cincinnati Reds. How did that come to be?
I was about as lucky as a guy can be, to be honest with you. It was in 1996. It was my last year at Miami University as a student, and I had been doing the games on the commercial station, on the greatest rock station ever, in my opinion, 97X WOXY, Oxford, Cincinnati, Dayton, the future of rock and roll. But they carried Miami hockey too. So I got to DJ at night occasionally, and I got to do hockey, and they were recognized by Rolling Stone in the 90s as the best small market station in the country multiple times. Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, they made a cameo appearance in that movie. I thought at the time, I'm moving. I'm at the time just turning 23. I'm finishing up at school and getting to do hockey. And I've got the world, I think, pretty much where I want it. And a professor of mine at Miami pulled me aside after class and said, I have something you might be interested in. And he had a former student of his that worked for the Reds and who was the public address announcer for one season, but was moving to baseball operations, and they needed somebody to fill it. And, these days you'd have open auditions. You wouldn't get down to the 20th of March, 10 days before opening day, and realize you needed somebody. So time was on my side anyway. And they brought me down, and I interviewed for it with Marge Schott, who was the majority owner at the time. And it was a pretty bizarre interview, to be honest with you. She didn't really ask me any questions. She talked a little bit behind her desk, the cigarette smoke in the air. She was a chain smoker. She had the St. Bernards. There was dog fur all over the office. And she gets up from behind the desk, and she comes around and she hugs me and she leaves. And I'm standing there by myself. I didn't know what was going on. And then the guy who originally brought me down came in and asked me how it went. So I told him exactly what I just told you. And he said, that's great. A hug means you're hired. Come down. We're going to do the paperwork. I said, wait a minute. Are you telling me I'm the new public address announcer here? Just a hug is the seal of approval, I guess. So
welcome to the club. Don't even say, it's so powerful, this hug. You don't even need to say you're hired. It's just, that's what it is.
It's like Fight Club or something. I mean, the first thing is we don't talk about getting hired as a PA guy.
I guess not.
10 days later, I was on the field, opening day, 55,000 people. And it was a game that, for folks who are my age or maybe a little younger, will remember vividly. You may not, but we got into the top of the first inning, my very first game, and the home plate umpire, John McSherry, dropped dead on the field.
Oh, I remember that story now. Yeah.
I'd been on the job for about 10 minutes. So anything that has happened in my career from that point on, as long as everybody's still alive when it's over, it wasn't that bad, because that's what happened on my first day on the job in Major League Baseball. I ended up staying 7 years. It was one of the most rewarding, incredible, fun times in my life. I still have a lot of friends who have gone on to other jobs themselves, but we still keep in touch. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And I'm a huge baseball fan anyway. I was before that, and I still am. But to be around Major League Baseball, Ken Griffey Jr. was there during that time.
Yep.
It was a lot of fun for me.
Man, that what a way. Welcome to the majors there, John Walton. You have to kill some time there. No, oh gosh, no, that was not supposed to be a pun. Oh gosh, that was and that's the end of the interview, folks. No. Well, it's because your connection to Cincinnati, you mentioned you were from, you moved to Southwest Ohio, you went to Miami University, now you're with the Reds, and then your first big gig was in the AHL with the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. Now, nowadays, just coming from personal experience here, John, not many folks get to go right from college to the second highest level of pro hockey here in North America. How did that all of a sudden come to be where you're calling games for, at the time, the farm club of both the Anaheim Ducks and the Detroit Red Wings in the American League after they left Adirondack?
Yeah, I had a little bit of time with Detroit there. And again, right time, right place, and very fortunate. I was working for the Reds before that came about. And I was working at WLW in Cincinnati. Weekends I did sports, but to make it a full-time job, there was another component to my job, and I was the backup for helicopter traffic, which means occasionally I had to get in a helicopter and do traffic. And that was a job I never need to do again. It sounded really cool when I first started. It's like, oh, that sounds great. And I'm not that great with motion sickness. And when you're up in a thing that kind of fishtails through the air for a couple of hours, I think I lost 10 pounds that summer. I ended up doing that. I didn't eat a whole lot, but it was a great opportunity for me. And I was working at the #1 news station in Cincinnati, and I was also on pretty much every other station in town, on the rock station, on WEBN, and a few others. And so my name was out there a little bit, and they had known my hockey background. So when the job opened, I applied for it, and having a little bit of name recognition already in the market helped. And it was a great starter job for me to be able to learn the ins and outs and some of the good and bad of being in pro hockey, and the 80 games and some really, really rugged bus travel from Cincinnati. And, they were in a division with Philadelphia. So 6 times a year you were on the Iron Lung to Philly, and, going to Hershey, and a lot of teams. That was the westernmost outpost in the AHL back at that time. So it was, a great first step for me, and, kind of prepared me, I think, in a lot of ways for pro hockey, but also for my next gig, which was the one that I truly have the fondest of memories of, and that, of course, being in Hershey.
We'll get back to our chat with John Walton here in just a moment, guys. But I got to ask you, got beard? Get Primal. That's right. Got beard? Get Primal. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get Primal. Maybe you're that guy that's never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin Oils will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients, and with low impact on our planet, Primal Origin Oils makes balms, oils, and whipped butter that are renowned for the best feel in beard products available. All products are fair trade certified and handcrafted in the United States. We know that every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you to compare their ingredients and the feel in beard to the other products you've used. We promise you will see and feel the difference as well. Remember to use the code LOCKEDON to get 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Once again, go to primaloriginoils.com and get 20% off by using the promo code LOCKEDON. Yeah, because that's, no disrespect to the folks from the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. I grew up in the IHL, so the Cincinnati Cyclones for me were a mainstay in Grand Rapids, watching them play back in the day. You used to have some classic battles in the playoffs. I got to see the Mighty Ducks for the first season when the Griffins were in the AHL, but then you go to Hershey, which would have been the second year for the Griffins in the American League. And you go from the Mighty Ducks they were around for a little bit, but, not the long-standing franchise, going from that to the Hershey Bears, who I'm pretty sure they've been around since before World War II. What kind of a change was that? And, was that just kind of a, fortunate circumstance, or was that just, that was the next big step for you there?
Well, I think everything to a certain extent is fortunate circumstances when you're able to make moves that ultimately get you to the place you wanted to be all along. But for me, during my time in Cincinnati, I was very good friends with Dave Mishkin, who is now for more than 20 years been the radio guy in Tampa Bay. But he was in Hershey and was there for 8 seasons, and called the 1997 Calder Cup winner for the Bears, and was helping the team that summer in 2002. They were on the move from Hershey Park Arena to Giant Center. And in the midst of all of it, John Hollers, who is the television voice of the Anaheim Ducks, was the radio guy in Tampa Bay. And he interviewed and got the TV job with Anaheim. And that opened up the job in Tampa Bay. Well, Jay Feaster, who had run the Hershey Bears, was now running things in Tampa Bay. I knew of Dave and brought Dave down. And so suddenly the Hershey job was open. And I had told Dave years before, if you end up leaving this job, please, I hope I'm your first phone call, just with the history and all the things that you just said and the Calder Cups and what it means to the folks in central Pennsylvania. And I wanted to be a part of that if it ever came to be. Well, he, in August of 2002, it was late in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
And he called me and said, I'm going to Tampa Bay. It's going to be announced in a couple of days. And if you really are serious about coming here and want an interview, I'll let Doug Yinks know, Doug, the president and GM of the Bears. So I had driven out. I interviewed with him and came back and waited. And it'd been a few days. And early part of September, right around Labor Day weekend in 2002, he had called and said, do you want to be the voice of the Hershey Bears? And I said, yes. It meant leaving the Reds. I had about 2 weeks left of baseball season, and it was the last year of Synergy Field / Riverfront Stadium. So I ended up closing the new building, which was kind of neat in and of itself. It felt like a little bit of closure with that and then moved on. But I found myself in Hershey Park Arena, not knowing a soul. I didn't know anybody in Hershey at all. I wasn't doing the game. It was a preseason game. They hadn't moved to the new building yet. And I'm a Twins fan, Minnesota Twins fan. I've grown up Minnesota. You know, things that get ingrained in you at the age of 6, you just can't quite kick. And the Twins are that for me. And I walked, and the Twins were in the playoffs playing Oakland. And I have nothing to do.
The Moneyball year. That was the Moneyball year, right?
Correct. That's correct. Yep. And I was walking through the arena, and I said, I don't know anybody. They don't know me. I mean, it's not like, you know, I walk back to Hershey now. I get to see so many people that knew me from my time there. At the time, not a single soul knew who I was. So I was walking with absolute anonymity, and I wanted to say, listen, the Twins are on. They're playing in the playoffs. This is a preseason game. I've seen a period and a half. I've met all the people I'm going to meet. I snuck back in the room to catch some of the game. And there was one other person in there who was also a Twins fan, also had snuck away, and also was in a mood a little bit to talk about the Twins a little bit, although you might know him for a different reason, the head coach of Miracle on Ice in 1980, Herb Brooks.
No way.
And I was blown away. I was standing here with Herb Brooks and only Herb Brooks watching an inning and a half or so of the Twins. They said, well, we better get back. It's like, yeah, we better. It's nice to be able to watch it with you. And he passed away less than a year later. He was in a car accident in 2003. And
jeez,
I will forever remember sitting there watching my boyhood team in the job that had me what I felt like is a step away from the NHL. And I'm sitting here watching the Twins with Herb Brooks for an inning and a half. It went way too fast, but it was a neat experience for sure.
What was he doing there? Like, that's my big question. Because
he was the director of player personnel at the end for Pittsburgh. So Wilkes-Barre Scranton was playing.
Okay, that's their plane. Okay,
and he had a professional reason for being there because the Penguins were there. But being a native of St. Paul, he wanted to see how the boys of summer were doing, and I appreciated the fact that even he snuck away to be able to watch an inning and a half or so of the Twins before going back and. I don't know, maybe evaluating some of the guys for the upcoming season, but it was a really neat thing for me.
All right, let's see. The boys are looking good. They're playing pretty all right. All right, cool. Back to baseball. My goodness. That reminds me of the story of there was during the 2010 final. I knew a bunch of folks from the Canadian media it was the Hawks and Flyers that year, and a lot of people were in the press box, but a lot of people were looking off to the side and on their phones watching Roy Halladay throwing a perfect game because that was a big deal to them, even though the Cup finals were going on. It's kind of a funny story, man. Herb Brooks, though, like that, for me, that would be like, like that would be like the guy. But man, so that's a great way to start your career in Hershey, eh? Like you get to meet Herb Brooks in your first real game and whatnot. You know, what were some of your favorite moments? Like we talked about, the bus trips before in the past, and unfortunately how it's kind of affecting COVID right now with the American League because the Hershey Bears had issues earlier this season. But, back in those days, like I don't want to say minor league hockey was kind of gung ho, but it just seemed like there was a lot more personalities at that level at that time.
I think that's probably true. And, during my time in Hershey, there was a line of demarcation between things that weren't going all that well, and then things went absolutely gangbusters crazy. And I guess it's kind of a two-part answer, because step one was ending an affiliation with Colorado and beginning an affiliation with Washington. The second happened about a month and a half later, after the affiliation was announced, that we needed a new head coach. And a guy who had been in the LA Kings organization, who had taken Manchester to 50-win season after 50-win season, but couldn't get through second round of the Calder Cup playoffs. A guy named Bruce Boudreau.
Huh,
and
there's a name.
Bruce was hired as our coach in late May, early June. Don't forget exactly the day, in 2005. And all I knew about him was that he'd had a lot of regular season success. Was a veteran AHL coach coming in, and all right, well, let's see what happens. Well, what happened was, and I should preface this by saying that under Colorado, I got there in 2002, went out in the first round in a best of 5 to Chicago, didn't make the playoffs, and going back to Cincinnati, I'd never gotten out of the first round either. So I had never, in going into 7 years in professional hockey, I had never called a second round playoff series. I didn't even know what it felt like. I didn't know what it was like to even win a playoff series at the pro level. Well, that changed quick. Calder Cup in 06. Calder Cup final, lost to Carey Price and the Hamilton Bulldogs in 07. Won the Cup in 09. Won the Cup in 10. Ended up going to 4 finals in 5 years. It was a parade of guys who would go on to play in Washington: Mike Green, John Carlson, Carl Alsner, Jeff Schultz, Thomas Fleischmann. It was an amazing run. And Keith Aucoin and Alexander Giroux, who didn't really play a whole lot, either one of them, for Washington, cups of coffee for both, but were the most dynamic duo in scoring, one of them at best in AHL history. Giroux ends up getting 60 goals. They both get over 100 points. And the team won 60 games and then 16 more in the playoffs in 09-10. 76 wins in a single year. I'll never experience anything like that ever again.
That's incredible.
The Caps or anybody else will never be able to put something like that together. So it was an incredible run, and a friendship with Bruce that endures to this day. When he got the job in Vancouver, he's come on the podcast with me. He's still a friend, still has his house in Hershey, and I think will forever now. Even with success in Vancouver, he'll be back in Hershey in the summer. And just one of the greatest people in this game. I was so happy when he got the Vancouver job, because it's the longest he's had to wait, really, since getting to Washington the first time. And
right,
it was a lot of time with COVID on the sidelines, and he was doing TV here in Washington. But I'm so happy for him. And if it doesn't impact the Capitals, I'm squarely pulling for the Canucks, because he's one of my favorite people I've ever known.
One of the hottest teams in hockey at the time we're talking about this. They're one of the best. He certainly helped that team turn out. And geez, he was so bored, John, during the pandemic. He and his wife decided to create a new junior hockey team out there. That not the Bears, the Cubs, the Hershey Cubs of the USPHL, and they're playing at the old Hershey Arena because it's still standing out there. And Boudreau's like, let's get these kids something nice to play out there. So cool little thing they're doing out there with the Boudreau family. I know his son's a part of that team as well. So then, like you mentioned, they win in 2010, and then 2011 comes around. The Caps had another kind of a tough playoff out, and next thing you know, how did it go? I mean, because I've heard like one of my favorite stories of someone getting hired is Ken Kal, when he's getting interviewed by Mike Ilitch, having Mike Ilitch go out of the room to call Red Berenson to see if Ken's actually good enough to be the Red Wings guy, and that's how that worked. How did you go from Hershey to Washington? Obviously, everyone's like, oh, it's an American League call-up. But I don't think it was that simple, was it, John?
It was. I think in some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. I immediately, once we had affiliated with Washington in 2005, I didn't realize how good it could be in dealing with your parent club when you are the guy at the AHL level. Nate Ewell, who is now the head of PR with Vegas, I was out of the NHL for a period of time running College Hockey Inc. in New England, but one of the best people you ever meet in this game, one of the nicest, truly genuine human beings I have ever met. And the thing about Nate that I always was really impressed by was I was the minor league guy, but he treated me like he would treat Mike Emmerich or anyone else. That's just how he is. He's just an incredible person. And George McPhee, I wasn't, the only thing that surprised me was he wasn't in Vegas sooner, quite frankly, because of his bond with George and their time in Washington together. But I've been going to games. One of the things that I couldn't do with Colorado and I could with Washington was we're only separated by a little bit more than 2 hours. So I would go down to 8 or 10 games a year. Occasionally would be an intermission guest on Caps Radio or on television. And, you know, I never had really done any more than that. And Chris Kerber, who is the play-by-play on radio in St. Louis, one of my longest and dearest friends, we went to college together. He was a little bit ahead of me. We knew each other a little bit better after Miami, but he went to Miami too. And my dad taught at Miami, and my dad was his academic advisor. So we were more than a little acquainted. Whenever he was with Springfield in the A, when he'd come in, my dad would come down and he'd want to see my dad as much as he'd want to see me. And then he got the job at 99-2000. He went to St. Louis, going home. Just awesome story. Awesome family. He's got a huge family, lots of brothers and sisters, and he got to go home to the NHL. Doesn't get a lot better than that. So flash forward to 2009. I hadn't really done any NHL call of any kind at that point. And I came down, the Blues were there, and I thought I'd duck in and see Kerber. And he said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "All right, I'll see you later." And he comes back around. He said, have you gotten called up? Have you done anything for the Caps here, like play-by-play wise? I'm like, no, I hadn't really done anything like that. He said, "You want to do the second period for us tonight?" I'm like, "You mean on Camel X?" Yeah.
The station you grew up listening to in Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, you know, I still, like Ken Wilson, this is St. Louis Blues hockey. I mean, I had it ingrained in my head. Like, I didn't need to know the out cue. I knew that from listening as a kid. So I went on and he let me do the second period that night with Kelly Chase, which actually ended up turning into my demo reel that I gave. You want to know what I sound like calling Alex Ovechkin? This is what it is. And I'd given it to Kurt Kuehl, who was the decision maker with the Caps in 2011. So I had told Chris at the time and I told him when I got the job in 2011 that every and any opportunity I had to do for others what you did for me, I will do that as much as humanly possible, which is why for most preseason games, I don't do a lot of them. I'm there. I'll intro them. But we have our Zach Fish from Hershey has come in. Everett Fitzhugh would come in from ECHL Cincinnati, now with the Seattle Kraken. He came in and did a game for us a few years ago. We've had a number of folks who've come in, and I continue to do that and continue. Zach does a bunch of regular season games for us too. When I was doing NBC work, he would do, I think during the bubble or during the 56 game year, I think Zach ended up doing 9 games for us that year. So, you know, I'm a big believer in that just because I know what it's like to be in the minors for 13 years and not see a lot of daylight. And you're getting older and you're wondering if your chance is going to come. And thankfully mine did because of the Capitals. But I want as much daylight for as many people as I can because I know how much it means to be able to know what an NHL building sounds like in your headset and what the crowd sounds like and how it feels and the professionalism of it. Because in the minors, it doesn't work like that. I don't care where you are. Even in Hershey, there's a big step up between all of those things. And, you know, I'm, you know, Zach's going to be an NHLer one day too in Hershey. He's done an unbelievable job for us. And it's fun for me now in this role to be able to kind of grow the next generation a little bit too.
And that's something I've seen too, just from working with other people. Harrison Watt, who works up at Ferris State, and of course mentioned Robin Hook, like guys that are like, you know what, I have all this other stuff going on. Do you want to work some games? And Harrison, I've done a lot of work with him up at Ferris. And like I said, Robin's let me do a few games at Western. Like, people realize, like, even though as, dare I say, cutthroat as the broadcasting industry is, I mean, you and I have both worked at radio stations where people can just be there one day and not the next. A lot of people in this game, in the broadcasting game, are very, very supportive, very helpful. Like, I remember I sent an email out just to feeler out to a couple people, and I got a couple of responses. Hey, Tyler, you know, we don't have anything going right now, but hey, you know, we love your demo reel. We'll definitely keep in touch. You know, and they give you tips or whatever. Like, how many like other places like, you know what, we don't need you. See you later. Goodbye. Throw it in the trash. That's it. Like, that's one thing that this industry, like this part of the industry, hockey broadcasting in particular, I'm sure it's for other broadcasters as well and other sports. But like the fact that people want to see the next generation be prepared and do well and succeed. And then, like you mentioned, you bring in a guy like Everett Fitzhugh, who's now with the Seattle Kraken. And you mentioned Zach Fish, who we've had on the show before. And there's no question, having listened to him myself, he's going to be somewhere soon. Like that right there, I think is the cool part of the story, is that people get opportunities, even though, like you mentioned, like how you were all of a sudden the Cincinnati Reds PA guy, getting opportunities, even though you would never think that would ever happen.
Yeah. And, look, if there ever comes a day where, the Capitals say, listen, you've lost your fastball and, we've got, the club wants to go in a different direction. If your time comes to an end, it comes to an end. I love this job. I want to do it as long as I'm healthy and as long as I'm able to, and for as many years as I can. But you know what? I got other things I can do too. And, if the best guy, what's better for the team and what's better for the game of hockey, that's what you should do. And if that answer isn't me one day, that's okay. Because I believe that if you do it the right way, and if if Zach is able to find a place somewhere, and, I think the thing that I'm proudest of, I didn't get to go to Seattle this year because we haven't been traveling, but boy, I would have loved to have seen Everett in the booth there. And I will one day, and he's going to come here in the second half. And I can't wait to see him on the other side of the glass. Because you know what, to be able to, know what his story is, and to know that him coming here, and I know how excited his family was. They all came to DC for his game. And, to be able to talk to him after the game and go out of Chinatown for a little bit afterward. Those are great memories for me. And, to be able to see him just make the most of the opportunity. And he's just got such an energy about him. My tie was to Cincinnati, and that's why I knew who he was to begin with, was because, I still pay attention to the Cyclones, and I still pay attention to things that go on in Cincinnati. And, you never know where it's going to come from. He probably didn't think, I called him in the office that day. I was probably the last person in the world he thought was going to call him that day when I asked if he wanted to do it. And I said, look, think about it. I know you got to, come to Washington, and it may be tough to do, but it's yours if you want it. And he called me back 2 days later and said, you bet I'll be there.
Wow.
And, that's really neat for me. And it shows the initiative on his part too, because, it's not nothing to pick up in the middle of September. And by the way, the Cyclones were unbelievably supportive of that too. Yeah. And they're one of the best, I think, in sports at this point, certainly in minor league hockey, of knowing that, hey, listen, these guys aren't here to stay in the ECHL their whole lives. We're here to help them the best we can. And, I was thrilled to see, they were so happy for his opportunity in Seattle. And, it doesn't happen like that everywhere. But no. Cincinnati did a really nice job with, promoting and giving him that foundation.
Yeah, I bumped into him once when I was covering for the ECHL, and he just was this, and I know the term glowing personality is kind of overused, but like one of the most optimistic, positive people I think I've met. Just all like super happy and super like just knowing what he was doing. Like his job was to work in hockey. Like he was happy and like excited to be wherever he was, whether it be Kalamazoo, Toledo, Cincinnati, whatever. He was gracious to where he was at.
Yeah, and he's a Detroit Lions fan too, so that doesn't necessarily come naturally.
Listen, they only got blown out twice this year, John. You know that.
But listen, a guy who, from his days at Bowling Green and being able to hear his games with Cincinnati and, keeping tabs on him after he had done the game with us and, now being in Seattle and, hearing highlights of his, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's something special. And I know he's doing a lot of great stuff over there for the new hockey community there in Seattle and Pacific Northwest. Last thing I want to wrap up with here, John, and I think it's the year that all Caps fans love to remember, 2018. And not just with Washington Capitals. You yourself, dare I say, did double time a little bit. Because you mentioned you've done work with nationally with NBC in the past. 2018, you got to do the Olympics. And I know I know Pyeongchang was a little bit odd for everyone, no NHLers and whatnot. But what was calling Olympic hockey like?
It was, next to calling a Stanley Cup winner, the best thing I'll probably ever do. It was such an opportunity. And for Sam Flood and John McGinnis at NBC Sports they had called me the September before and asked me. And my face went numb when they asked. Like, I didn't have any inkling that it was coming. It was a random phone call on a day going to training camp that year for the Caps. So, The Caps would let me do it, which was terrific because it meant being gone for the better part of a month. And on the other side of the world, and having a number of people fill in for me while I was gone. But it was really the last normal Olympics too, as it turned out, the way things have been. I don't know that I would have gotten the chance because, even with Beijing, a lot of it's going to be based in Connecticut. That may be permanent. I don't know. But the thing is that you are where the whole planet is watching for about, 3.5 weeks. And, the games themselves, it's the only game. The second game I did was the Korean team was playing Japan, and it was a unified Korean team, and Kim Jong-un's sister was at the game, and there were soldiers with Uzis above the press box or some sort of machine gun. I'm acting like I know what I'm talking about. I don't, but a big menacing looking gun anyway. Yeah. And a lot of them were there, and it was a sobering moment, to be sure. But to do 15 games, which I ended up doing, I did the first time I ever worked with Pierre Maguire was there, and he and I did a whole lot more NHL games after that. But I got a chance to work with him for the first time there. I did a little bit on the men's side. I did the bronze medal game for the women, and it was unbelievable. It was emotionally, I was charged up for about 2.5 weeks, to the point that when I got on the plane and I was flying back from Seoul back to Washington, I was amped up for about the first 40 minutes, and then I started to get tired. And I'm not one that usually sleeps on planes, but I had the lay down bed on the plane in business class on the way back, and I slept for almost 10 hours straight on the way back. I was so amped for so long. I think my body had just about enough, and I needed to get a little bit of rest and then get back into the NHL schedule only 3 days later. And that season turned out pretty well too. So 2018 was about as good as it's ever going to be for me, I think.
Yeah, because that run, because you were there for a lot of it. Obviously 2012, your first year, was an incredible year just based on the fact they were able to work their way through Boston with Braden Holtby and, coming up from Hershey and whatnot. And then, there was 2013, which was a little bit tougher, but then there was the 2016 was a good year that came up short. 2017, you lose to Pittsburgh again. What was 2018 because I've heard from people that have been Boston Red Sox fans forever. Some people say 2004 was the greatest time of their lives. Some say it was the biggest relief of their lives. What was 2018 like from your side of things? Just having to go through the real tough grind of that entire playoff, having to find a way to win without, with this point, Marc-Andre Fleury had left, having to be Matt Murray being your only, or not Matt Murray. For some reason I was thinking that Braden Holtby not starting the playoffs on time, beating Pittsburgh, beating Tampa, and then going on to the Stanley Cup Finals against the new Vegas team, against Marc-Andre Fleury again. That's where I connected it there. What was that like from your side of things, that run?
Well, it was crazy because, and one year that you missed, which might have been the most heartbreaking, and everybody remembers Pittsburgh in 16 and 17, losing to the Rangers in 15 in overtime in Game 7, I think was the hardest loss to take personally. Losing to Pittsburgh, yeah, of course, given the rivalry and all that and the way in which they did it, and that there's plenty of scar tissue to go around, even on my tenure with the team. You mentioned 2012, you're a game away from going to the conference final after a pretty rough regular season and falling just short in a Game 7 again to the Rangers, and losing with Stepan's OT winner. It was just that they were up 3-1 in the series, and then the Pittsburgh years and the President's Trophies, and they just couldn't get over the hump. And every single interview you ever did going into 2018 is, well, they're having a great regular season, but and if they can't get over the hump of the playoffs. They're like, well, it's November. What are we going to talk about here? That was, the rite of passage of pretty much every year before 18 was, everybody's going, well, how are they going to mess it up in the playoffs this time? I had, my wife and I were going to go camping. We had a camp travel trailer. And when they, in the Columbus series in that first round, lose Game 1, lose Game 2, and, things didn't look all that good in Game 3 either. And you really kind of got the feeling, look, if they get out in the first round here, like this could be a tipping point in the franchise. Who's not going to be here next year? Because, you can't losing 15, losing 16, losing 17, losing 18 in the first round, and everything's going to stay the same. And I think the sense about that in April of 18 was, if this doesn't happen here, and it looked like it wasn't, Columbus was playing awfully well, then, maybe they blow it up. I don't know. I mean, there was certainly some feeling like that. I remember that. And, the game goes to double overtime in game 3, and Lars Eller ends up winning it. And that bounce off his foot started the greatest 2-month run I'll ever see. And it started with 4 straight against Columbus. And, okay, here in the second round. And now in the second round, it's Pittsburgh. And in game 5, they get outshot in the second period like 18-3. And it's like it had a kind of a feel of, here we go again. And then they come storming back to win in the third period, of which I had said in the middle of the third, in reference to looking at the fans sitting below me that can't believe this is real life. Like, this is what Pittsburgh does. They come in and, they pull out the can here and start whipping us. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And that's what I said. It's okay to believe. And you have to believe at some point. And I really felt that game changed the whole fan base, because, the fan base, and even Brian McClellan had said this, in the couple of years before, where, home ice advantage goes away when Pittsburgh gets the first goal in the first period, because everybody in the building's like, oh no, we're going to lose. And, the life's out of the building, and that's it. It was the most lively building ever after that. Every game, whether it was Tampa, whether it was Vegas, that nobody expected bad things anymore because they'd beaten Pittsburgh. There are still people today that say Kuznetsov's goal is the biggest thing ever, even more than as much as winning the cup, just because it was Pittsburgh and it was finally put to bed. And that's the call that everyone always plays in mind, where the demons have been exercised even as much or more than the cup winner, because that's the one that really lit the fuse, I guess, for everything else. But to be able to watch them beat Pittsburgh the way they did, and to be able to watch them, the Tampa series was just an incredible 7-game set of hockey. And then Vegas was the shortest playoff series I've ever called for the Caps up to that point. Everything had gone 6 or 7 games in the first 8 years I got there. I was like, you can win this in 5? I didn't even know that was possible.
Oh my gosh, I'm expecting like 2 more games. I don't have my travel plans booked for another month, guys. Come on now.
Yeah, a bottle of Tums and in a game 7. I mean, that's what we do every series. I just thought that was normal. It was anything but. I think, and having Ron Weber come back and call game 4 with us, the original voice of the Caps, and so many fans. I'm going to say dozens. I think it was dozens is the right number of fans with tears in their eyes seeing Ron in the parade, who called it from the very beginning when radio was all you had. In 1974 to 1996, he was here. And he told me after he called the game 4 with us, he's like, if there is a parade, the only thing I want in my life is to be in the parade. And we made that happen. So that was a great, great run, and something that once you do it the first time, you got a ring, you got to call a winner. Not everybody gets to do that. I've been incredibly, incredibly fortunate.
There's nothing better than calling a Stanley Cup, and of course, calling games in the NHL in general is something awesome. And just hearing your road has been something, because the dips and turns, right? Like, it's not just, college hockey, like straight up to the top. It was, like you said, you were getting motion sickness from being in the middle of a helicopter to working with the Reds at Riverfront, one of the final multi-use stadiums that was built, or final ones that was closed. The Skydome, I think, is the only one that's left standing right now in Toronto. And then going through and then getting the call up to the NHL, working the Olympics. It's all great. The crazy question now, there's a lot of people that are always uneasy when I ask this question. What is your favorite call? If you ask a fan, it's that's like you said, the Kuznetsov goal, the Holtby save, or when they're the Stanley Cup champions. Like, everyone has their own of certain broadcasters that they listen to. What is John Walton's favorite call from John Walton?
It's tough to say one, but I think one thing that is, that continues periodically in these parts, and, there are a lot of guys that have gotten to call Stanley Cups, and I am thrilled that I can say I know what that feels like. But almost nobody has had a goal scorer reach the heights that Alex Ovechkin has. And I've called 400, 500, 600, 700. 500 to me was just as clean could be. And if you're talking to Joe Beninati, or you're talking to me, or you're talking to anybody, All you're hoping when you have a milestone coming up, please, Lord, let it be clean and let it be easy to see. I don't need any tips off the breezers on the way by. I don't need any question on it. And sometimes that happens because this is hockey and it moves fast. You want something clean. 600 was against Winnipeg, and it was a goal mouth scramble where he came in and punched it in. And there was a moment where I thought my heart leaped out into the 400 level because I wasn't quite sure, but I think it was, and then I was sure. And maybe that quarter of a second that felt a lot longer. And you know, if you heard my call, you wouldn't know it, and you, Joe B, you wouldn't know it either. But I swear, if you'd ask him, you'd ask me, you'd ask anybody in that situation, your heart's in your chest, because this is the one that long after we're dead will still be around on the highlight reels, and please let it be okay. 700 took a long time, and 700 was weird because it was in New Jersey and it'd been stuck on 699 for a while, and the Caps were losing in New Jersey. It was a day game. I mean, it was just, there's a lot of things.
A day game in New Jersey, that's bad.
Yeah, and the puck came out from behind the net, and it was just a quick bang, bang, one-timer, and you're always aware when he's on the ice, but that one happened fast, and we got that one too, and I felt good about that. But coming up now is 800, and fast potentially, and even this season before it's over, he's going to pass Jágr, and there's going to be two names. When I was a kid, I didn't think anybody, even Gretzky, I don't know that we thought, you know, Hal's record's going to stand forever. He played into his 50s. He's got 800 goals. And then Gretzky did it. And I remember Gary Thorne's call, and ESPN had the rights at the time, and being able to see that happen. And my gosh, I mean, to be able to, I mean, that's who's ever going to top Gretzky on the list. And look, that still may be the case, but I'm going to be there if he gets there. And 800 passing Jágr, and then the march. Every goal from Howe on is going to be. I was in Cincinnati. I lived there when Pete Rose got 4192, and every hit got him closer. And I kind of know what that feels like a little bit when he was chasing Ty Cobb, and I just watching as a kid. That's what it's going to be like. Once you're past Gordy and that's it, every goal is going to be like that. And he's going to pass Gordy. I think he's going to do it next year. And when that happens, the whole hockey world's going to take notice. I used to think that, you know what, Gretzky's a long way off. We'll see. The way this season's gone, I don't really think that anymore. It has an inevitability almost a feel to it. He's got a long way to go, but I really feel like that call, that one is the one that, even as much as Kuznetsov and the Demons and winning in Vegas and all of the heartbreak, going to bed and the desert in 2018, I think that one, if I get a chance to call 895, there's nothing left in this career for me to do.
That'll be something. We'll all be on our ears listening for that call. Like I said, may not be next year, may not be the year after that, but the plan is eventually, of course. And we did before the year, we did the statistic, like, all right, here's how many goals he has to score each year. But then again, I don't think we all expect him to score even over 20 at this point of the year. But boy, oh boy, he has been something special to watch. And John, from all the Caps fans, myself included, from listening to you, because I myself, I'm one of those guys that during the playoffs, I need to have a game on. And you were always one of them. I can obviously rail off a bunch of others, but I love listening to what you've done over the years. And the Caps fans have loved listening to you as well. We hope you keep going for a very, very long time. We want you to be one of those that's so gray in your beard that you just feel like, man, that is a lot of white and that guy's going. We hope you do it for a long time, John. Thanks again for taking the time and taking this trip down memory lane. I've enjoyed it. I hope the folks that are listening and watching have enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you very much, guys. Follow John Walton at John Walton PXP. Caps this morning, every morning from here until the end of time, John. That's how long it's going to be, knock on wood.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, Tyler. I've been very fortunate to be able to be a part of this organization. I hope to be here for a long time. Thanks for having me.
And once again, a huge shout out to John Walton. When I remember I brought the story up to him, like, John, like, how much time do you have today? Because that was, of course, last week when we recorded it. It was in the middle of the accidental 4-day break, if you will, unlike this week where it was kind of planned. I remember I was like, do you have like an extra half hour or so today? We ended up talking, I think, between both interviews. I think that part, you guys listened and watched it. It went for about a little bit longer than the interview we did with him last week. I love those sorts of things. I remember I mentioned it on yesterday's show. I love talking to guys about their stories and whatever. So awesome John Walton, as always. One of the first guys that agreed to come on the show when I got hired here on Locked On. So I really appreciate him. And I wanted for you folks to know what makes this guy such a cool guy, because he does stuff like this. Comes on the show, chats about the Caps, and is willing to chat about his career. And I guarantee it. Listen, guys, if we had 2 hours together, John and I, oh my gosh, we could probably find more stories than finding out Michigan State and Miami fighting over the Redhawks or the Redskins at that time, scraping up ice there at Mount Ice Arena. So maybe that's for another day. Maybe we'll get the clearance to do that one of these times too. But thank you all very much for watching and listening to this episode of Locked On Capitals. As always, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll get through the news today. I know Fucale got sent down to Hershey. A couple guys put on COVID protocol. We'll get to that. Obviously, the New York Islanders, who the Caps play on Saturday, have had some issues of their own. We'll get to that on later on this week as well. Make sure you follow us, guys, at Locked On Caps on Twitter. Follow me, the Insider of the Insiders, Tyler Kuehl, at TJKU29. We'll see you all tomorrow and next time on Locked On Caps.